Hello and welcome to You're Booked. I'm Daisy Buchanan and I'm delighted to return to your ears for a second series of sneaky shelfies, spine-chilling confessions and crimes of literary passion. I'll be introducing our fabulous guest shortly, but firstly I'm thrilled to announce that my next book is coming out in March, and we've teamed up with the Margate Bookshop to make sure there's a special discount for You're Booked listeners. The Sisterhood is my memoir. I love books about families, books about sisters, and books about womanhood, and I've written a book about my relationship with my 5 younger sisters and how everything from our friendship to our fights has defined my relationships with other women. It's about challenging what we think we know about sisterhood and how contemporary womanhood is about seeking similarity while celebrating our differences. It's been described as The Mitfords meets Fleabag, and it's published by Headline on March the 7th. The Margate Bookshop is one of my very favourite independent bookshops, and it's my local. It often pops up at the Turner Gallery, but you can visit it anytime at themargatebookshop.com, where there's an eclectic and thoughtful curated selection, whether you're looking for beautiful books about art and design, compelling novels, moving poetry, or books that are simply about the magic, despair, and everything in between that you experience from simply being alive. Throughout January and February, you can pre-order The Sisterhood from the Margate Bookshop and get a 20% discount across the site if you use the code BOOKED. If you prefer to buy books independently, this is a wonderful way to support a great bookseller, and buying my book supports the podcast too. I'm so excited about The Sisterhood. I can't wait to hear what you think, and I can't wait to hear all about the treasures you discover at the Margate Bookshop. Now back to this week's guest. I'm so excited to share this with you. It's a conversation with the award-winning journalist and author Poorna Bell. Poorna wrote about her story in her acclaimed 2017 memoir, Chase the Rainbow, One Man's Journey with Mental Health and the Woman Who Loved Him, published by Simon & Schuster. The book is about her life and how she tragically lost her husband to suicide. This does come up, and I want to make you aware of that just in case it is difficult to listen to. Through her writing and all of her work, Poorna has become an extremely important voice in the mental health community, but Poorna is in no way defined by tragedy. She's quick, she's clever, she's extremely funny, and a must follow on Instagram. She's at Poorna Bell across social media. Poorna has 2 O's, and I never dreamed someone could make a gym selfie, inspiring and witty, but she is my lycra-clad idol. Her new book, In Search of Silence, is published by Simon & Schuster in May, and I'm so excited about it. She's using her characteristic compassion, wit and insight to explore the gap between the expectations we're supposed to have for ourselves and the reality of being alive. We recorded our interview at her home in Teddington. I wish you could see her stunning sideboard. I had furniture envy throughout. You might hear the odd plane noise. We were close to Heathrow and in a few flight paths. Poorna, one of the first books that you have shown me, and normally I really have to dig deep for people's sexy books, but you're like, here is this. This is The Parrots of Desire, 3,000 Years of Indian Erotica by Amrita Narayan.
Narayanan.
No.
Yeah, that's quite a mouthful, I think, even for me. Yeah.
It's the double N.
Sorry, no innuendo there.
No, I should do that. This is normally, beating me to all the punchlines. So, when did this come into your possession?
So I bought this last year when I went on sabbatical, and India was one of my places that I visited. But because I was on sabbatical and I had to operate from quite a small suitcase, I had to be really restricted with the amount of books that I wanted to buy, because like a lot of book lovers, I absolutely love buying books when I'm abroad. For me, India is a place that I visit regularly. And unlike a lot of other places, English language books in India is a huge thing. And they do editions and they do books by Indian writers that you wouldn't necessarily get anywhere else. And I made the mistake of going into this bookshop in Calcutta, actually, where I was there for a few days, and I clapped eyes on this baby. And I just thought, I'm never going to find this book anywhere else. If I try and buy it through Amazon, I'm going to end up paying over the odds for it. And the writing in it is just absolutely beautiful, because what it does is it mentions texts about sex. Sorry, that sounded like the world's worst poem. But there are texts in there that come from this book, this very ancient book called the Rig Veda, which is thousands, I think it's like 1,700 BC old book. And for me, it's really important to feel quite connected to that part of my parents are we're South Indian. And it's quite important to feel quite connected to that part of cultural heritage. And especially like Indians and sex at the moment, it's getting better, but it can be quite prudish and it can be quite conservative. And this book is just packed full of things from the Kama Sutra. It's packed from, modern writers and poets talking about sex. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful book. And really opened my eyes, actually, to this massive heritage around, I guess, like how people's attitudes to sex have changed. And there's something about a dildo made from buffalo horn in there as well.
Wow. This is just having a bit of a flick there. I'm sorry, now it's my turn to be embarrassed about the innuendo.
It's one of those books. It's not like I kind of read it and I'm like, oh, yeah, now I'm in the mood. It's more like it just helps to connect me to this other part of me that is actually quite, full of feeling and thoughts and a lot of passion, but which I forget about when I'm working or going to meet mates or whatever. And I think it's just, as a lot of books are, I just think it's this very good way of unlocking parts of you. Sorry, this is all sounding like some really dodgy Mills and Boon, but it unlocks parts of you, darling, that may be hidden in secret. No, in all seriousness, it
only revealed in the light of the baby oil glinting through there. But but seriously, that's such a beautiful concept, I think, and such a generous one, and something that I think we give a lot of lip service to. Oh God, here we go. But we forget that. I suppose that generosity, and also I think we forget that our sexuality is it's an holistic thing. And I don't know if you agree with this, but sometimes I worry that now, when we talk about sex all the time, but it's often in a very, very negative way, and especially because it's become so politicized, and it's right that it is, and it has to be, and there have been so many problems for so long. But what very little I've read of that beautiful book is just about a time of people being loving and loving of each other and of themselves and being together.
Yeah, and I think there are passages in there that definitely look at what it's like to be a couple or what it's like to be in a relationship. And there is definitely a female skew in that. But it's also about your relationship with yourself as a woman and how you connect to your sexuality and sensuality as well. And being able to do that in a way that isn't Mills and Booney or isn't, let's have a giggle. I realise we've giggled a lot in the last 5 minutes around it. But that isn't making you feel ashamed about things. And I think that the coming together of those two things, I think that book actually manages perfectly, because the way that I think a lot of people view erotica, if they view erotica or think about it at all, is kind of pornography. And I don't...
Quite prescriptive.
Yeah, and that book for me isn't pornography. You're not necessarily reading the sex stories of other people. What you're reading is passages, whether that's prose or poetry, that's actually about you as a person. So that's why it's there front and center on the main shelf.
I mean, I had a good look and I found no porn, only beautiful images.
Yeah.
Can you remember when you were growing up as a younger reader, the first book that you ever encountered that sort of had a similar impact on you? The first thing where you thought, there's probably a bit more to reading than I realised.
Well, I think for many of us, the gateway drug was Mills and Boon, that our mothers owned. As well as that, it was also just, the Daniel Steels.
Were you reading quite openly, or were these books that you had to kind of find and acquire?
This was furtive reading. And I think Dolly may have said this when she chatted to you, but there was a bookcase in the house, and you knew that those books were there. And I don't remember how this information trickled down to me, but I knew that those were the books, that had certain passages in them. And you would kind of go back and you would reread it, and in your tiny brain try and make sense of what it was that you were reading, feeling quite excited by it, but not knowing why you felt quite excited about it. And I guess because none of the other stuff that you were reading really addressed any of that.
And what I love so much about that time as well is all the descriptions where you don't really have a context for anything, and the weird ideas you hold on to about sex for some time, because that's the way things are budding and flowering and hardening, and sort of the mental picture in your head is, like, is there a spaceship in here, or what's going on? I wanted to ask you as well. You've got some beautiful Murakamis. You've got Men Without Women, which is possibly a political statement. I don't know. Is that I've not actually read that one, but it's a beautiful edition.
That one I started. If I'm being very honest with you, I'm more in love with the cover than I am with the content. And I love Murakami, but he is kind of going the way of certain male authors once they hit a certain age, where I used to love their early work, and I would include, Hanif Qureshi in this, Salman Rushdie, and their later work just seems to like not grip me as much. And that book, which the first story, I think, from what I remember in it, is basically a commentary on women drivers being fairly shit. And that was the only other book, apart from the Parrots of Desire, that I carted around in my suitcase for 8 months. So, there was a lot invested in
Taking
that.
up valuable suitcase real estate.
And I just didn't love it. I mean, the first book I ever bought of his, which is on the other bookcase, which is,
Wander over.
as we move over, is Sputnik Sweetheart. And I didn't know.
Oh, God, is that when they're on the island? And he's trying to find...
No. So this is... it's set in Tokyo. It's this one. It's where there is an island involved. So they do go to Greece at one point. But it's about a young man who's in love with another woman who is in a relationship with another woman.
I remember this one. This is gorgeous. It's I don't know, I think there have been subsequent reissues, but I love this set of editions of Murakami. The paperbacks, sort of black and white, the stylized, very sort of definitely... When I first came across these, I don't know how you feel, lots of very sexy indie Asian ladies, all a bit manic pixie dream girly, which I thought, that's really cool when I was 22. And now I feel a bit differently about.
Well, so his book, I don't often necessarily remember every place that I've bought my books, but I didn't know anything about him before I picked that up. So that's the first book of his that I've ever bought.
And where did you buy it from? When was this in your life? How old were you?
This was a very long time ago. I would say I was probably about 24, 25. And I had to go to... Sorry, this is not the glamorous story you want. I had to go to Ealing Broadway to do an interview with someone. And they were late and there was Waterstones there. And I just went in there to pass the time. And I was trying to find a book, but I think this was in the days before... Yeah, obviously, this was in the days before you had smartphones. So I couldn't really just instantly look stuff up and I didn't really have any recommendations. And that book just caught my eye and I don't know why, but I think, and this is sometimes, power of a front cover and all of that. So I came across it, I read the back of it and I thought, okay, let me just see what it's like. And I really liked the tone and the style of it, which is actually what I love about a lot of his books. It was just very comforting and it was very easy and I lost myself in it a bit. And then I just bought everything else that he wrote and some of it's a bit hit and miss and some of it's just brilliant.
Really interesting thinking about how rare that is. Do you do that often still? Do you just ever go into a bookshop and think, fancy that? And
so I think I've just noticed a very dodgy brown stain on the front cover, which I think is chocolate.
I love this because it shows that you've had this book in your life for long enough to have really loved it and taken it places. And I'd love a nice worn book.
Well, I think that with my book choices these days, so like a lot of people, actually, maybe I don't know where I'm plugging that out from. That isn't even rooted in statistics. I just made that up. What happened was I was very into studying English and I did English as a degree. And I feel like I had a finite amount of serious books in me and analysis, and I just ran out of steam after I left university. So at school, and even when I was really, really young, I just remember reading like Perry Mason books when I was about 9. Now, who the hell reads like a Perry Mason book?
Had you seen Perry Mason on TV, or did you just find it one day and think, I like this?
So at that time, I was living in India, and those were just the books that were popular around that time. But I think nowadays, I tend to choose books, either non-fiction that I think is an area that I want to know more about, or if it's fiction, I just want it to be a fairly easy read. I'm being very honest here. Cerebral books at the moment.
You want to be kind of consumed and transported.
I do.
A sort of a lovely...
I want to be entertained.
Charmed.
Yes, charmed. But I would say in a specific way. I like magical realism. I don't love escapism. So the difference obviously being that I don't mind if, I don't know, I'm reading a book and a goblin appears out of nowhere. I don't really want the kind of escapism which is like some very extreme version of Sex and the City where I'm reading a book about someone living a glamorous lifestyle and blah blah blah. Like that doesn't connect. I don't think that's ever really connected with me as a reader.
I think I'm the absolute opposite. Where all I wanted sort of those books where, you know, the really, because I love a charming story, and when you've got adorable goodies and really hateable baddies, and when everybody gets rewarded and punished in a perfect way, I'm like, I'm here for that. And then a gnome comes, I'm no, thank you.
See, I can do it. I can do all of that if it was set with gnomes, not people.
Oh, can we? Next, I know, you know, it's not like we've got much on. We've got quite a schedule. Let's co-write a book. I will do the escapism. You bring the gnomes.
Yeah, or goblins.
I wanted to ask you about you as a young reader in India, because you've talked to me about the significance that books have in India and the way people read and people treat the books. Could you tell me about sort of things you remember reading and loving? Did you ever, have you always read in English?
So I don't read or speak any other
lots of variations of that.
So the place that I'm
really culturally insensitive, sorry.
No, don't worry. So there are like 100 odd languages in India, and the two that we would speak in the area that I come from is Kannada, which is indigenous to the state Karnataka, which is where my parents are from, and Hindi, which is mainly a language of the north, but it's the language that Bollywood films are in, and you tend to find it's spoken more broadly. But I was born and I grew up in England up to the age of 7. And then the idea was that my parents wanted us and my sister, who was already in India, to all live in India. And we were going to grow up there to have a better sense of our own identity, because they didn't really want us to grow up as English kids.
Oh, so your sister wasn't there when you were...
She was with my grandparents, yeah. So for, I think it was a couple of years before we moved over, she was already living there with my grandparents. And so the idea was that we were going to all move over there. And my dad was stuck back here because there was a really bad recession. This was like the end of the 80s. And so it was my mum and I who moved over there, and we set up home with my sister. And the idea was that once my dad sold his house, he was going to move over. But that just didn't really happen. And we spent about 5 years in this limbo. And then eventually my dad said, no, I can't work in India. So we're all going to have to move back to England, which is what we did. But that time, which was 7 to 12, which is quite a formative time in your life, it taught me a lot about, I think, the ideas of privilege that we have. And even when I compare like my sister and my experience to our British Asian friends that we have here, is that, you know, I think satellite TV came in a couple of years after we'd moved there, but not everyone had it in their own house. So if you had a standard TV, you pretty much had the main national TV channel.
So this was when you'd moved back to India?
This is when we'd moved back to India. So you didn't... Yeah, so the idea of regular telly was not a thing. And books were always a massive part of our upbringing, but it became even more so when we were there, because you would buying books was super expensive. So I remember our mum taking us to libraries, and just that feeling, that sensation, you know, when you knew you were going on a Saturday morning to pick up this whole bundle of books that you could then just get lost in on the weekend. It's just, even when I think about it now, it's such a delicious feeling to be able to do that.
Is this where you were getting the Perry Masons?
The Perry Masons, but also comics. So we used to read a lot of comic books as well.
So you get comics from the library.
So you get comics from the library, yeah. So that was, there wasn't kind of a one or the other. It was definitely a mixed bag of things. And obviously there were loads of lighter reading books and, you know, kind of preteen books that you would pick up as well. But I remember the thing I was telling you about was the sanctity around books that we learned there. So for a number of different reasons, my family are Hindu, and, you know, back in India as well, is that the golden rule, you never, ever, ever put your feet on a book. So a book is considered to be this portal to knowledge, to education for so many Indians. It's the way by which you kind of get ahead and you earn money so that you can buy food. And it literally boils down to as visceral a connection as that. So you never touch books with your feet, and they're viewed as being, this kind of like holy thing. And whether or not you believe that, I mean, I'm an atheist, but I remember when we came back to England and, you would go around mates' like your friends' houses, and you'd see people like just kick a book out of the way with their foot. And even now, like as I am telling you, Daisy, or just stepping on a book, and you just can it's anathema, to do that to a book. But you couldn't really you couldn't say, you've literally just done one of the worst things I've seen all year. But you couldn't really say that, because then you'd have to go into this explanation. And back then, you didn't necessarily feel that comfortable going into explanations like that.
Because even now, I'm thinking, because I keep so many books right by my bed, and I definitely have a bit of, early morning stumbling, and I'm like, I will move those books. Yes. I feel what you feel very strongly. So did this idea of the, reading being and writing being so special and sacred, and books being so significant, is that something that had an impact on you becoming a writer?
I remember really clearly, I was about 7, and it was one of those things where I'd been okay or fairly good with maths up until that point, and fairly okay and good with English up until that point. I don't really know what happened, but my ability to do maths just dropped off a cliff, and my ability to do English just kind of went, up and up, and it just was easy. I enjoyed it. And I really, really related to it. I couldn't really tell you why that happened. It's just that I enjoyed reading books. And then when we went on this like ghastly holiday when I was 7, and this was in India, and I just remember being bitten a lot by mosquitoes, and the electricity was a bit dodgy. So there would be periods when it would cut out, and that meant no fans or aircon or whatever. And I just wrote about the entire experience, and writing about it made me feel a lot better about the, crappy holiday that we've been on. But also I then shared it with other people who then read it, and they just started laughing at it. And there's a weird chemistry, a good kind of chemistry in writing something, seeing someone's reaction to it, and seeing that it gives them some pleasure, and realizing that it's a two-way street. And actually, in addition to the pleasure that reading gives me, writing kind of gives that back in a way.
So that's amazing. Was that when you thought, what I'm doing, it has a value beyond what I realised? I'm entertaining people with this, and people are enjoying what I'm producing, and it feels good. I do think that, God, family holidays, it was that weird period, wasn't it, where your holiday would somehow be worse than your life at home. It wasn't a treat, it was the opposite. It was the point was it was just nice to come back where you have more electricity and more facilities, and you're just less cramped.
And you don't have to sit in a soggy swimsuit.
Yes.
And I think it's just looking back now.
Bitten on the arse.
I know, a lot. I think looking back now, it's just, you expected your parents to just have everything in hand. But of course I guess my mum would have been the same age. Oh my God, that's a horrifying thought. She would have been the same age that I am now when we were over there. Yeah, when we were over there. And I don't know how sufficiently I could organise a child's holiday. I'm pretty sure there'd be bits that I'd forget to do, and this, that, and the other. And yeah, to me, I just remember going on them thinking, I know this is supposed to feel like it's better than being back home, but I kind of want to be back home sitting on my bed reading a book and not being bitten.
So were there any particular books or writers where you read their voice? Because something that's come up a few times is people reading books and thinking, oh, I didn't know you were allowed to write like this. If you're allowed to write like this, I can do it. But, having read books that were quite sort of dry and traditional, was there anything that really sparked that for you?
I don't know if it's quite that, but I remember the book that just changed everything for me, and I cannot remember the author's name. It's the guy who wrote Neverending Story. I remember coming to England and everyone had seen the film and they hadn't... I had to stop talking about this because it made me sound like the biggest nerd. But everyone had seen the film. And so when they would talk about Neverending Story, I just thought that they were talking about the book, and then obviously realised that they were talking about the film. And the reason why I was so horrified by this was because the book was just incredible for me. And I've reread it, countless times. And it really was that stepping through a doorway into somewhere that is completely different, full of all of these fantastical things. And that showed me how it was possible to write things, or a universe in which It didn't resemble my own, really, at all, in any way. But it was the most magical thing I'd ever experienced. And then I came back and everyone's like, oh, yeah, I've seen the film. And I was like, it's not the same.
It's not the same.
It's not the same. But
Did you see the film and think, this is not how I imagined it?
I watched about 10 minutes of it and I was like, this is a pile of shit. And I'm sorry. It is an insult to the book and its memory.
We'll be back to Poorna shortly, but I want to tell you about my steal of the week, a book I loved so much that only paying the cover price feels like an act of theft. This week it's The Hygge Holiday by Rosie Blake, which was published by Sphere in 2017. This is the charming story of Clara, who arrives in the gloomy village of Yulthorpe and spreads Scandinavian cosy cheer, turning everyone's lives upside down in the best possible way. I read this book one very gloomy afternoon, and it should be available on the NHS for sad days. It really is a blissful sugar rush with absolutely no come down. It's funny and satisfying, and Clara is downright adorable. When the real world feels too much, we can go and live in the one that Rosie Blake has created. That's The Hygge Holiday. It's published by Sphere, and it's out now. Now back to Poorna. On your shelf, the writer I can see the most of.
Okay, Terry Pratchett.
Tell me about him.
Him, I don't remember when I first started reading him. I think that it must have been quite a while ago when I was in my early 20s, and I'm now 38. But I just remember thinking, this is it. This is the perfect balance of how you write fantasy, but how you also stitch it together with the current real world that we're in. And I think he had such a talent for being able to do that. And those books that you see dotted around in no particular order on the shelves, I must have reread each one of them about 3 or 4 times. And some of them belong to my late husband, Rob, who loved him as much as I did. And we used to do this thing where we'd buy the new book and then fight over who got to read it first. And he always won because he was a faster reader. So apparently, in some weird logic, I'd somehow get it faster.
Did you know when you met, was he a writer you both had in common, or did one of you share him with the other?
No idea. Yeah, no idea that he really loved him. And so I think it's because he liked a lot of really crappy science fiction. I mean, we're talking about, on the fringe of oddball universe, and I couldn't really stomach that kind of extreme science fiction fantasy. But for me, Terry Pratchett was that perfect middle ground between all of that. And I think the only time I ever met him, which was at the British Book Awards, which was however many years ago, I asked if we could take a photo, and this was in the time when cameras on your phones were really crap and it was really blurry, but I couldn't ask him to take another photo again, and now I've lost it.
Oh no! It definitely exists somewhere. I'm sure that in these digital times, nothing is ever lost forever.
I know.
It's got to be out there.
Yeah.
So something that you mentioned before we came here was how Rob was sort of the first person that you were ever with who loved books as you loved them and had a similar relationship to the one you did with them.
Well, I think it's when I told you that, I was thinking, God, that's really odd that I love books as much as I do. And the majority of men that I dated before him, it's not that they were not clever. It's just that books were just not really their thing. I mean, I don't remember ever really talking to a guy that I dated about books. We definitely didn't do the airport thing, where when you're going on holiday together and you go to an airport bookshop. And then I met Rob, and I remember when I went to his house for the first time, I just noticed that there were a lot of books everywhere. And it was this particular characteristic that he had where he always had, so he was a Kiwi, so his style was quite relaxed and casual. So very often he'd wear a pair of jeans. If it was summer, it would be a singlet. If it was winter, it would be a t-shirt. But he always had a book in his kind of back pocket.
I love that. The t-shirt for warmth on those chilly winter days.
And the singlet for ventilation. Yeah. But yeah, he always had a book in his back pocket. And I just remember books always being this part. I mean, he was quite quiet as a person, but even if he went around someone's house, I don't know how the hell he got away with this. He just kind of mooch over to their bookcase, just pick up a book and then just sit in a corner and read it. And because it was Rob and he just did it in such a brazen way, he was allowed to do it. I think he even read a book at one of my friends' weddings.
Wow.
I know.
Can you remember what the book was?
No, I don't think it was anything that great. I just remember thinking, I hate you so much right now because you somehow managed to get away with this. No one else seems to be able to. But yeah.
I was thinking about a non-reader I dated who was a very big football fan, and once when at his house I read I don't quite know how to explain who this person is. I think he played for Hull. I read the biography of Dean Windass because it was all that was there. And then when he took me to the football, the first thing he said was, "You're not to bring a book." Oh.
That's just cruel. I mean, the thing
It really was.
I think some of the guys that I've dated before, which I think is possibly worse than saying you don't really read, is saying that, oh yeah, I only read, those like really stern business books.
Oh God, yeah, the ones that like get up at 2 a.m.
Yeah.
I thought, what's that?
I'm only gonna...
The ones that like how to live like Mark Wahlberg in his cryogenic chamber.
I don't know what those
He's
those
got
are.
this mad like routine, and it was
Oh yes, he wakes up at like 3 a.m.
Yes, and it's like from 3:15 to 3:45.
Yeah.
Family time. Wake up, family.
Yeah.
Quality time.
Yeah, fun times in his household. Those kind of books. But I just feel like that's not really a book choice to me. That's just, you just don't want to look like a maniac. So those are the books that you tend to buy and put on your bookshelf. But I don't think they really read them. I think it's just something that they have to say. But yeah, Rob loved books. And we definitely had in a Venn diagram of books that we would share and that we liked. But my God, he hated Murakami. Like, he tried it and he just said, no, I'm really sorry, I can't. This is garbage. And that was the one thing we just didn't see eye to eye on.
Did he try Sputnik Sweetheart? Was that his first
He
go?
tried several. So I gave him Wind Up Bird Chronicle, actually, to begin with.
Is that the short stories?
No, that's the really chunky
God,
one.
I don't know Murakami at all.
It's one of my favourites. And then I tried to give him Sputnik Sweetheart, but it didn't take. And I also tried to give him David Sedaris, who is lurking away over there.
I wanted to ask you about David Sedaris because I love him so much, and those books look well read. But are any of these books? Is there anything here that's that belonged to Rob or was a gift from Rob?
So when he passed away, there was a lot. He had a lot of books, and some of it was quite hard to look at, and some of it, just for practicality purposes, I couldn't keep in my flat because one of my friends moved in with me and I needed to actually create space for her. So I gave a lot of them to charity, but I can see on the bookshelf, this is, I think, from his family. What a Boy Should Know. Super old, right?
That is beautiful. I'm just going to describe this because it's this gorgeous kind of green. I said somewhere between moss and O'Donnell. I'm going to be pretentious about it. It's a gorgeous cloth cover with a beautiful gold. Is there a word for that kind of inscription or plating on the front? It's in a very ornate box. What a Boy Should Know by Dr. A.T. Schofield and Dr. Percy Vaughan Jackson. And The Lightning Thief.
Yeah.
Not really.
No.
It was published by Castle and Company in 1914. So this is...
I think it was given to Rob by his mum. I think it was actually...
It's the first... it reprinted February 9th. Still, it's gorgeous.
Yeah.
So this is very... I see a lot of God. God has given to every male these parts, and in his wisdom has ordained them for a great purpose when full manhood is reached. Right?
Wow, what a passage to pick out there, Daisy.
It's almost like I know on some bizarre...
I've never read it, if I'm being perfectly honest, but I know that book meant a lot, that he was given that, so I didn't want to give it away.
Was it in his family? Did a grandparent of his own it?
I'm not sure. I just remember his mum handing it to him when we went over there in 2013.
Oh, so it was a relatively recent gift. It wasn't, like when everybody else was getting cartoon puberty
when he
books.
hit puberty, no, it's like, what a boy should know. Here's, read about your manhood. No, it wasn't that. And I know that this...
Oh yes, so you said that the Hanif Qureshi is...
Yeah, I think that's his, and also so Rob was a massive bird lover and nature enthusiast, and there are books of his, but I've put them on the bottom shelf, which let me have a bend down.
This as well. I've been doing squats at the gym purely to get to the bottom shelf.
So this seems like a really odd book, but he used to keep these type of books, so they're very... they've got classifications of newts. And this is not a book that I am ever going to reference, but he used to love taking these type of books on holiday.
So this is, just so people know, a photographic guide to reptiles and amphibians of New Zealand by Tony Jewell. And I can't remember, because these are, I don't know if there are lots of, it's published by New Holland, but I've seen these, they're the ones that are at kind of paperback height, but half the width. Perfect for pockets.
Yes, perfect for pockets. I can definitely tell you that. There are a few of those lurking around, and I don't think I will ever get rid of those, actually, because they just remind me of him in a really nice way. But we would occasionally, which I think I showed you before, so this is...
Pets with Tourette's. Mike Lepine and Mark Lee, and I just want to tell the listeners that there is on the front a picture of a rabbit in a hat saying "toss bag," which isn't an insult I've heard, but I'd quite like to bring back.
I'm sorry, but the theme just continues.
It's like a single entendre, isn't it?
It really is, and so yes, it's not exactly the most cerebral.
I just want to say so, and the page that Poorna opened at random, it's a Labrador puppy with there was a speech bubble coming out of his mouth, and it was just saying hand job.
And now we're looking at one which has got a rabbit and a fish that looks like Dory saying spunky chunks. But this actually was more about the inscription. So this was, I wrote Dear Rob, I saw this and thought of you. What that says about our relationship boggles the mind. Which is just something that we used to do, I think. We used to just give each other books from time to time and just write inscriptions in there. The one book that he gave me, which I did start, and here we go, was this. And I tried...
Oh, wow, Master and Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov.
He absolutely loved this. I found it just quite difficult to get into, but I think for this, it's the inscription. So Rob wrote this whole inscription in there and said that it was one of his favourite books. And this for me, oh my God. Yeah, I know.
Oh, love.
I know. And so, oh my God, you've actually succeeded in making
Sorry.
me... No. Don't worry, I don't tend to, but this inscription, I can never get...
Is it okay to read this?
Yes,
or do
absolutely.
you want me to read it, or would you like to read it?
I can read it. So, dearest, wonderful, lovely, beautiful, clever, funny, loving, perfect wife. The Master and Margarita is one of my favourite books, so I would like to make you a gift of this copy. I hope you enjoy reading it as much as I did the first time. Love from your loving husband, Rob. I did not enjoy this book. When I told him,
I feel like we should have a hug. That'd be weird. Bring it in.
I know. Oh God, Daisy, I never get emotional, but yeah, I mean,
He just going around making people cry.
I was just like, because he kept asking me, he was like, have you started it? And I was like, no, I'm going to get to it, knowing full well that I'd started it. And I was like, this is horrendous. I just can't continue. And then eventually I just had to fess up and I said, I'm really sorry, but this book is just nuts and I just can't get on board with it. And I think, but I will always keep that, even though I know I will never read that book as long as I live. That inscription was just, I think I came across it when I had moved into this flat because I was just thinking, ugh, it's that book again. And I couldn't remember that was the inscription inside of it. But yeah, that is very precious, I would say.
Oh, wow. And I do think it's really, really sort of fascinating and lovely to love someone and you both love books together, but you don't necessarily love the same books together, but that's okay. I think it's what the world needs now as well. In this time when we're really polarised about opinions, like you have to love this and you can't hate this and I hate this. And actually we can all love each other very much by having quite big differences of opinion and sort of culture.
I agree. There is a part of me that sometimes gets, I don't know if intimidated is the word because I just feel I'm too old to be intimidated in that manner. But when people, for example, quote, great passages from books, or they seem very erudite, or they still read very important books, or they say, oh, when Proust used to say, and I don't remember like half of my stuff from my time at university, so I will never be that person that can quote passages. But I've just realised that actually, and as you can see from my bookshelf, not only is it disorganised, but there is a lot of, I would say, fluff on there. So there is what my brother-in-law calls fairy porn, which is Sarah J. Maas, who is lurking down there. But I love her, and I think I absolutely love her books, and I think that they're just very easy to read. And for me, I love those books as much as I love books that are considered to be important in terms of literature. And I think I'm just too old to be shamed into thinking otherwise, really.
Well, I suppose that is the absolute joy of a book, isn't it? Is it's sort of, I think every single book, this book is a million books. If a million people read it, that makes it a million different books. And if because I do think these stories really, really, really stay in your head. And there are books I love romantic comedies and I love fiction and things that, people will think like are totally throwaway. But I'll have read, quote unquote important books and not be able to tell you what happened, not remember what happened, but I can tell you exactly who fell in love with who, when.
Yeah.
Also, I love it says contains mature content not suitable for younger readers, which, if I was like, I will get past the magical realism for the sex.
Well, one day, so I have a 4-year-old niece, and one day that's going to be her version of a grotty little Mills and Boon. So yeah.
And you will pretend you can't see her take it from the shelf,
I'll
but
probably
you'll
give
know.
it to her. Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you about the David Sedaris,
Yes.
because I think lots of people love him, and I think he's a really interesting writer. Maybe women like us, because he's someone who writes about his life in a very honest and very, very funny way. Do you feel as though you've ever been inspired by him or borrowed from him in that I can write about my life sense?
I think that, yes, definitely, to some of what you've asked. So the first book of his that I ever read was When You Are Engulfed in Flames. What I would say with David Sedaris is he is an excellent diarist, which is what we know about his writing anyway. But I really like how dark some of the observations are, because it's kind of like the mean stuff that you're thinking in your head, but half the time you're surrounded by people that don't think it's really appropriate to vocalize it. But he does vocalize it, not just in his books, but to other people around him, and then chronicles their reaction to something that he said. And I think that what I've learned from him, for sure, about humor is that it is possible to comment on something fairly serious or be able to move quite quickly between dark and light, and to be able to have humor in that. And that's definitely something that I like to use in my own writing, because you have to laugh at stuff.
You really do. The
Yeah.
world is a dark and difficult place.
It really
And
is.
sometimes I think that's all we have.
I was really shocked so he chronicles a lot about his early drug use. So, which I found really shocking, because he describes his whole, really normal upbringing with all of his siblings and so on. But he also talks about his drug use in a completely matter-of-fact way. And I realize this is a lofty claim, I have never read anyone who writes in that manner, in a similar style, in the way that he does about his alcohol and drug use. And I have to say that I think that there's quite an art to doing that, in that he writes about it, but it doesn't really define him.
Yes,
You know?
absolutely. Even someone like Kat Marnell, who I love, and I really loved her memoir. And I think that I'm interested in her because I think especially when it comes to women, it's like, I was a terrible, terrible mess, but now I'm fine. And, I got thin and all found Jesus and it's fine.
So there is Paul Theroux there, who is someone that I loved and actually really got me interested in the idea of kayaking and travelling, particularly this book, Fresh Air Fiend, which he signed, I think, from memory.
Did you meet him?
I did. So it was yes, I remember exactly when this was. This was in 2008 when I decided to go on a break from work. I'm not going to give it a title like a sabbatical, because that's too good for what it was. But I basically went to India for 3 months, and I decided that I didn't want to work and I just wanted to travel around, which is what I did, except I spent all of my money within the first 3 weeks of traveling, and then had to take a job in Mumbai for a month.
On just having a nice time?
Yeah. Yes, I had a very nice time. But I had to work
Buy
in...
a movie or...
No. So nothing to show for it, but good times and bad photos.
Excellent.
But when I was in Mumbai, and so I really, really was into Paul Theroux in a massive way, I saw that he was doing a talk at our local bookshop, and Mumbai is a huge city. So I just saw this as a sign from whatever, the universe, that I had to go to this talk. And, and I was reading this book. So Fresh Air Fiend, which is about, I don't know if you want to read the back.
So you were reading that when you discovered he was in town.
I can't verify what that stain is.
I thought it was part of the jacket design, to be honest.
Let's go with that.
Wow.
Yeah.
I like the bit about relating his experiments with biblical dieting.
So I don't really remember the biblical dieting. I think what was just in that a lot was, so I'd never been kayaking before. And when he chronicles some of his experiences going out in a kayak, and I think it's just basically about, this entire book is about being in the outdoors. And I had this book with me while I was traveling, and I got him to sign it. And I remember asking him, so I just said, look, and because I was very hyper aware of it at the time, I just said, as a single woman traveling around, and especially traveling around in India, I just said, I feel like there are things open to men that aren't open to women. And I feel quite self-conscious in a way that I would assume that men traveling around don't really feel like that. And I said, it just doesn't seem that fair. And what he said to me, and I don't know, I was like, oh, okay, thanks. But he did answer the question. And so I was just, oh my God, Paul Thor is answering. But he's used some weird analogy, like gazelles, and how basically gazelles get attacked by lions. And what he was trying to say to me, which I do understand, but at the same time I just thought this doesn't really help my cause, because I wanted to do all of the stuff that Paul Theroux did.
Yeah, of course.
But I felt quite held back by the fact of my own safety around that as a woman. But what he was trying to say was, as a woman traveling on your own, you stand out more because there are fewer of you who do that, and also that's not the world order, right, that we're in. But it didn't, and it made sense, but at the same time, it didn't really give any comfort, because I thought, oh, okay.
His answer was basically, yeah, sucks to be you.
Yeah, pretty much.
Bloody patriarchy. Bloody patriarchy.
Yeah, it has got on a bit better, because because since when I travelled around on my own in 2008 to, I don't know, 10 years later or whatever, it is a different landscape, and I still do travel a lot on my own. But having said that, yeah, it still sucks, because
You could have given me some good advice there, Paul Theroux. So can you tell me about your new book? Because obviously, you wrote a hugely successful memoir, and I've seen so many people who really just, loved that and responded to it. How much are you allowed to talk about your new book?
It's called In Search of Silence. And really, to be perfectly frank, after I wrote the first book, because the first book, Chase the Rainbow, had a very definite purpose. And the idea was so for example, on this bookshelf, you will see Joan Didion's Year of Magical Thinking. And there are various books on here that I bought after Rob passed away to make sense of his death and how I felt about grief and so on. Now, Joan Didion's book is fantastic, and she is obviously a superb writer, but I couldn't relate to it at all, because she lost her husband when she was a lot older, and and I read various books in and around processing grief, but there was nothing really that summed up how I felt and how I thought about it. And so that's why the first book came about, because I just thought, okay, I need books are how I relate to the world. I need to put out a book that sums up how I feel, because also there doesn't seem, I know I'm not alone in this, so there must be other people roughly a similar age to me who might be thinking or feeling like that.
Was it that you wanted something that was not sufficiently emotionally impactful, but that was maybe as focused on the feelings as much as the story and the how and the why?
Yeah, and I think just a reflection of yourself in books, because I think that some of the books that I really love and relate to is because I can see parts of my experience and myself reflected in those books, right? Which is how a lot of people relate to reading. But all of a sudden I was in this position where I just didn't see any of that, and there was this big part of myself that wasn't articulated anywhere. And so that definitely writing that book was about being able to do that. The second book, and I'm really glad that the book had the impact that it had. But the second book is a bit of a departure from that. But I hadn't planned to write a second book, because it wasn't like I got into writing the first book because I thought I want to get into writing books. It was just, there was a definite goal. I achieved that goal by writing it. And I think my publisher just said, look, are you thinking about writing another book? And I just said, not really, you know, it's not really in the plans. But then I told her about my plan to go off and travel for a bit, and, you know, and what I was thinking about in terms of my life and so on. And she said, well, that actually sounds like it might be a good follow on. And it did feel a bit like I felt quite strange thinking about it in that way, because I think, as a lot of people do, you just think, well, I don't really know why anyone would be interested in my perspective on X, Y, and Z. And then I think once I got over that, I just thought, okay, well, this second book is actually about a search for meaning. It's not necessarily about happiness, which is one of the things that I know that a lot of people want for me. And they want me to be happy, because if I'm happy, then it means that, you know, Rob's passing away wasn't something that irrevocably broke my life. But I kind of was still left asking all of these big questions and getting quite resentful, actually, of other people whose lives had moved on or were progressing in the way that they were supposed to be. Yeah. And also, I think when you use happiness as a compass, it's really hard, because if you don't feel happy for whatever reason, so like, let's say you're struggling with your mental health, or, you know, bad stuff has happened, or trauma or whatever, it can kind of isolate you. And this entire trip was about, I think, figuring some of that stuff out, asking the questions again around my life, being able to chronicle some of it. So my eye line is just drawn towards David Sedaris, but just some of the observational stuff around that and what people say and the places that you find yourself in. And also, it was just because I just wanted to take myself away from the chatter. So looking at the title of the book, I got really grumpy, and I just thought, no, the problem is other people. Which sounds like a misanthrope's encyclopedia.
It sounds like the times I've fantasized about putting on an Out of Office. It's just like, can everybody just please fuck off? Thank you. I'd love that as a subtitle.
Yeah.
So would you say you've been inspired to any point by Pull Through and the travel writers you love, or do you think it's it's not a travel book, but it's a book about other things where travel is an element of life?
Travel is definitely an element of life. The thing that I was very hesitant, and I'm trying to figure out how to word this politely, the thing I didn't want to do is woman goes on trip, woman finds self, woman is happy.
I think I know what you're alluding to.
Yes, I think you do. And that's why I was really hesitant to write a second book, because I just thought, I can't stand those books, and life doesn't work like that, and it's not in bite-sized chunks. And I don't know whether we feel a sense of needing to do that more than men, because there is a pressure on our success and how we manage all of those different components of our life. So having, you know, your work, your kids, your love life in balance. Someone like David Sedaris wouldn't give a fuck about that. Like, he wouldn't feel the need to, like, bung on a happy ending at the end of his essays. Like, he just tells life how it is. God, I feel like David Sedaris should give me, like, a stipend for all of the... Yes. But yeah, so it's... Yeah, thanks. Well, 100. Yeah, but it's just, you know, life isn't tied up as neatly, I don't find, in male writing as I feel that sometimes is done with female writing, because this entire thing, for want of a better word, cheesy and cliche though it is, it's a journey that doesn't have an ending until the day that you die. I think a big part of this is related to Rob passing away, is that I don't believe that the universe is going to save me or is going to fix me, or that there's going to be some predestined plan for me or how my life turns out. And I think
if I'd been through what you'd been through, and someone said, well, everything happens for a reason, I think I'd punch them in the face.
I honestly sometimes have to sit on my hands when someone says that to me, because the thing is, if I'm being kind about it, I don't think people follow that thought to its final conclusion, because I don't think they realize what that means for some people. Like, let's say if you've experienced a trauma, right, and basically what they're saying to you is, oh, that trauma that has taken you a lot to get over and affects you on a daily basis, that was part of some... Because if I knew that someone I would kick that person in the balls, the person who had created that plan, because why would you? But I don't think people mean it maliciously.
No.
I just don't think they thought about what that means for you.
I think they want you to hope, but they don't know. They don't think about everything that's underneath it. I do think about, messy clothes on a chair, and that when it comes to emotions, I think there are lots of kind of neat freaks out there who absolutely cannot deal with the idea of anything being sort of messy or on display. So like, say you're happy, so we can't see it, and we don't have to worry and fix that.
Yeah, it is like that. Or I think it's just that we're searching for a solution because realizing you're the solution is really, really scary. So realizing that you are the person that is going to have to, I'm not saying that sounded a bit, I'm not saying that there aren't things that might be influenced or impacted by other things. And I definitely am not saying that I know all of the workings of the universe and, and it's as final as that. I just don't really think that anyone is going to create that sort of happiness for me. And by that, so a lot of people, when you say something like that, go, oh, but what about dating? And are you going to meet someone else? And I'm just like, well, I'm not saying that that's off the cards. And yes, I am single, and yes, I am dating, and so on. But I'm just saying that if I don't meet someone, that doesn't mean that the universe didn't have someone out there for me or whatever. It just meant that that's just how things worked out. And I think for me, there was I don't want to rely on something like that to sort my life out, because I have to sort my life out.
Huge thanks to Poorna. Please do follow her on social media at Poorna Bell. Read Chase the Rainbow immediately if you haven't already, and pre-order In Search of Silence. Future you will thank you. I'm Daisy Buchanan. Thanks so much for joining me, fellow book inspectors. You can find me on social media at NotRollerGirl and on Instagram at TheDaisyB. Say hello, suggest some guests, and watch out for shelfies. Visit our show page, acast.com/booked, for more information about our guests and a list of the books they've talked about. If you have any other queries about the podcast, you can email us at ybooked@gmail.com. That's the letter Y, booked@gmail.com. Your Booked is produced by Dale Shaw for New Alaska and hosted by Acast. Please do subscribe, rate us, and leave a review. It's great to hear what you think, and it helps other people find the podcast. I'll see you next week for a spot more bookshelf bothering.